Physical media. Being a millennial, I've grown up with physical media my whole life, and I still collect it to this day. But the physical media I want to talk about today is music. The physical forms of music come on all different types of platforms. You have records, you have cassettes, you have CDs, you have 8-tracks, you got reel-to-reels, you got mini discs, and I'm sure there's plenty more out there that I'm not remembering right off the top of my head, but still, there's a lot out there. And in this new year, being 2025, physical music shows no sign of slowing down in terms of production and sales. But if you're new to music collecting or maybe even experienced, things can get really complicated if you're not careful. And that's partly why I wanted to make this video. I've been collecting music for around, say about nearly 10 years now, and my collection has grown from like 6 records and a CD to over 400 pieces of music. And I've also had a few different music systems in terms of actual playing machines throughout the years too. So as you watch me attempt and eventually succeed at repairing the Sony CD player, I'm going to just kind of go over my thoughts on the whole music buying process. And that includes things to buy, things potentially not to buy, and this stuff like that. This is more me just telling you stories and giving you advice. So with all that out the way, let's begin. Now, I know there's like a million different people on YouTube who've made videos about, don't buy this record player, buy this record player, what you should buy as a beginner, don't buy these records, why you should buy records over CDs, don't buy cassettes, don't do, the whole 9 yards of this. It's all the same thing. But that's not the reason I wanted to make this video. A part of this video will be me listing some recommendations. But the reason I really want to make this video is because I don't want y'all to get hoodwinked like I have before in the past when it comes to collecting. In the collecting world, regardless of the hobby, there's always going to be people who are going to try to deter you from getting what you actually want. So now I'm going to tell you a little story with some superb artwork. Around 3 or 4 years ago, I started getting into Batman comics. I was just fully invested into the stories, and I wanted to try to find as many good stories as I could without, breaking the bank or anything like that. And so while on YouTube looking for some more Batman comic recommendations, I ran across this guy who made a video that was over a particular Batman series that I was really invested in at the time. And this guy recommended some of the more popular runs from that series, but he also recommended a bunch of kind of no-names from that series or lesser known titles or less popular and stuff like that. But being new to the collecting world of Batman comics, I didn't realize, that these could have been possibly bad runs because he said they were really good. So I just, of course, bought them. So after spending all the time and money hunting down all these stories, I finally read all of them and they were awful. I mean, each one got progressively worse as I read along, and I was just like, oh my god, I'm stuck with a pile of junk. And so I went back to the guy's channel, and I had found another video that he had made about, essentially telling everyone not to get into Batman comic buying because you're never going to find the issues you want, and it's way too expensive, and you have to collect it a certain way. But then right after that, I found another video by this guy talking about all these issues that you're not going to be able to find because they're too expensive. He found in like a garage sale for less than $50. And not only that, but then he went to go get them shipped off to get graded and put in those sealed acrylic cases to make a ton more on them to make a giant profit. And I'm just here stuck with all these useless, worthless books. What the heck? But you live and you learn, and that's just kind of how I looked at that situation. I was like, man, this sucks, but I just need to be more careful next time. And that's how I've kind of been with all my worlds of collecting. I've tried to stay very particular about who I follow and why I follow them, and make sure that there's someone that I can trust when it comes to giving me collecting information. But last month, while preparing to make this video with recording the restoration process and cleaning up of the Sony CD player that you're seeing me work on, I ran across a video that I was like, oh my god, this is a repeat of Batman comics but with music. Now I want to preface this by saying I'm not going to give away the channel's information who made the video. I'm not here to start a fight. I'm not. But this still kind of upset me, and it was part of the motivation as to why I'm making this video. So the video's title, which I will not say, it had a really abrasive title. And I thought it was clickbait, but when I watched the video, it was not clickbait at all. This guy was essentially telling everyone that if they didn't have a certain amount of money and didn't follow a specific set of rules that this guy just made up for record playing, then they shouldn't get into the hobby. And the more I listened to the video, the more I paid attention to the backgrounds of the video, the more I paid attention to everything in the video. I was just like, oh my God, this guy's just a pretentious snob who's trying to deter people from getting into music collecting. I mean, the guy literally flaunts his really super expensive turntable and then turns around and tells you if you don't have XYZ amount of cash, then you shouldn't get into this hobby. And also, the hobby itself is really expensive and you shouldn't get it. And also, this hobby is very peculiar, so you shouldn't do that either. And it just goes on and on and on. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like, who gave this guy authority over listening to freaking pieces of plastic spin? So that's what made me want to decide to really make this video kind of a all-inclusive in terms of price, in terms of what you're looking for and things like that, because this is a really fun hobby. You get to own the physical piece of music and you're able to play it on a device, whether it be CD, cassette, or record, which are going to be the three main ways of music or listening to music that I'm going to be discussing in this video. And I really don't want this video to come off as me preaching at you. I mean, I'm really just trying to list my observations, what things are and aren't. And although I will list some recommendations, they're not going to be like, you have to follow this. This is just, hey, you have $300 you want to spend on this stuff. Well, here's what I would recommend for that. And I'm not going to try to give you crap. I'm going to try to give you something that I would own myself and still probably own, which is why I'm listing it in the video. So let's go ahead and get started with stereo equipment. My first ever piece of stereo equipment, or really stereo as a whole, is one of these Victrola all-in-one systems. These all-in-one units cover all types of stuff. I mean, you got your record player, your CD player, and your cassette player, which are kind of like your big three. But you also got radio, you've got aux in, you've got Bluetooth, you've got USB, and you might have a few others depending on which model you get. They also come with speakers, and the speakers sound fine in these for like a bedroom or something like that, which is where I housed mine when I had it. Now, a lot of people give these units crap, and yes, they're not perfect, and I mean, they have their faults. But one of the biggest complaints you're going to hear is that these things tear up your records, and that's just not true. Now, the stylus that comes on these turntables requires a heavier tracking force, but that's by design. That's how they're made. These systems are not overdoing it. They're not going to just munch up your records unless you just have a horrible stylus that you've overused, because you do have to replace those from time to time. But no, that's a myth. But I will say I ran into problems with the turntable myself on two instances. The first time, it actually scratched my record. To this day, I have no clue how it happened. My only guess is that maybe something wasn't centered right or something wasn't balanced right or level, but the needle jumped, and when it did, it scratched my record. And it was a awful jump. Like, it was like a jump and drag. I still don't know how it happened, but it damaged my record. And I mean, I freaked. I wouldn't play a record on that thing for weeks until I had fully examined it and make sure it wouldn't happen again. And even then, I was still paranoid. But I started using it again, and I mean, I used it for months, and I made sure the stylus was always clean, and in case I needed to replace it. I think I actually replaced it one time. But then disaster struck again. I was going to put on a record when all of a sudden the entire turntable system shut down. And so I freaking panicked. Oh, great heaven! I tried to fix it, but I mean, there was just no way of me getting that to work again. It had completely locked up, and there was no way of setting it free. The other parts still worked, but I mean, the main reason I wanted it was for the record player. But I realized that Christmas was on its way, and between Christmas cash and gifts, I could probably get a decent turntable and probably some decent speakers. I got an Audio-Technica LP60, as well as some Edifier R1700 BT speakers. I also ended up getting a new CD player via this Sony DVD player, though I did get this a little bit later on. And that meant this old Victrola system was no longer needed. In fact, I started having problems with the cassette deck in it, and I just decided it wasn't worth it anymore, so I decided just to scrap it. This thing served its purpose, but ultimately it was time to let it go. But I keep showing this same screenshot because I want you to notice something about it. The $129 price tag. These things are just cheap, and they're not necessarily god-awful, but they're also not really that good. You'll definitely get your use out of them depending on, how well you maintain it, like I did, but things are going to happen. And I could have just got a faulty system, and you could have one, you've had it now for 10 years and it works great, but in my case, I didn't really have that. And this was my stereo system set up for a little bit. It was just the CD player, this record player, and these speakers, which could also play Bluetooth out. And it was great. I never really planned on upgrading for a while, but as fate would have it, I would get a free upgrade. To make a long story short, because I can't really disclose any of the information in this, someone at where I worked left, and they had left behind a bunch of Technique stereo equipment. I was told I could take this stuff for free, and I ended up scoring 2 CD players and 2 cassette decks, but you only notice one in this video because the other one I traded. And that was my system setup, and I was really happy with it. I didn't think that I would need to get any upgrades or anything like that, but I quickly realized that I wanted to add some more stuff to it. And the main thing I wanted to add was an equalizer. But I happen to remember that my grandparents had a Sony stereo system from 1985 sitting in their basement. And I asked, hey, does it have an equalizer? And if it does, do you mind if I get it? And I was not only told that I could get it, but they also gave me the turntable and the radio that went along with the whole system. The only parts that I was missing now was the cassette deck, the CD player, and the amplifier. So I went on eBay to try to find the amplifier that went with this system, and after a few weeks of looking, I finally found one. I was also very fortunate to find a dust cover for the turntable. I guess the original either got lost or maybe even thrown away, I don't know, but regardless, I had to get a replacement. Now I just had to get the CD player and the cassette deck. The cassette deck was easy because my brother had it, and so I just swapped one of the Technique ones for his. And after a few months of searching, I was able to find the CD player that you see me working on right now. So the reason I wanted to fully complete this system was because it all can run with a remote control. The Control S input and output is what changed the entire system together. The radio, the cassette deck, the CD player, the amplifier, and the turntable all have this plug-in. And if you properly daisy chain all the units together, you have a fully functioning remote-controlled stereo system. But good God, is it a mess. But in my mind, it's completely worth it. And that's kind of the point I'm getting across here is for me, all of this, what I've done of the years of collecting pieces, getting new pieces, getting old new pieces, it's all worth it to me because I love the hobby. And even though I got a lot of pieces for free, I still spent around $650 on all of the parts that I had to buy. But you also got to keep in mind too, that was over years of buying. It wasn't all in one big chunk. I just started with a base and then built from there. And I think that's the point a lot of these guys miss when they talk about stereo equipment is that they almost act like you need to buy everything in one go or else it isn't worth it. And that's not true. Just start with one of the pieces and the speakers. That's all you really need. Or you could just start with the speakers or just one of the pieces. It really doesn't matter as long as you have some sort of plan on how you're going to get all the parts. And yes, it sounds tedious, but that's kind of the fun of it. You never know what you're going to get. You never know what you're going to find. You might have a plan for buying this turntable, but this one's on sale and it's just as nice, if not nicer. So let me get that one. And it's all just a game. And I think people forget that's kind of what draws people, at least what drew me into record collecting or the stereo equipment side of it is there's no telling what you're going to find. And there's always new stuff or new old stuff or whatever. It's all just fun. And even if you make a mistake, it's another piece of knowledge gained. And there's nothing wrong with that. But enough of me rambling. Let's actually go into the parts of a stereo system that you need to look for or get. And we're going to start with the biggest one of all, which is the turntable. Honestly, right now is the best time to get a turntable because of how advanced they really are. You can get a decent turntable that's fully automatic with built-in preamp for less than $200, and that's great. And for those of you who don't know what preamp is, it's essentially what boosts the sound from the record and stylus to your speakers. At least that's the simplest way I can describe it. This means that you can just find an independent speaker that has its own built-in controls and just plug the turntable in and let it ride. And I'll get into that more at the end of the video because I want to do a segment where I, give some recommendations, especially if you're new to buying turntables and stuff. But I really want to focus on two main subjects. And those subjects are new versus old turntables and belt-driven versus direct-driven turntables. Now, I would recommend if you're new to any type of record collecting or anything like that, to especially get a new turntable. I'm not saying don't get an old turntable unless you just happen to get one like for free and it comes with everything it needs. But if you're completely new to this, I wouldn't get an old one. And the main reason why is because of preamp, and it could be a very particular turntable. So a lot of old turntables don't come with built-in preamp, which means you're going to have to buy some form of amplifier, and they can be cheap or they can be expensive. So if you're new, like new, I would recommend just getting something that has built-in preamp because there's typically a switch that you can turn it on or off. And sometimes certain turntables require certain systems, and it can become a big mess if you're not careful, and you're going to have wasted money and time on something that you can't even use. And not to mention, if you need replacement parts, if that turntable doesn't have reproduction or new old stock parts that are readily available, you could be in a serious pickle. But also, don't let this deter you from getting vintage stereo equipment, especially if you're well versed or have had a newer stereo system set up for a while. Old stereo system equipment, it's cool. I mean, that's kind of the main reason I got into it, because it's cool, but it also sounded good. At least what I hunted down sounded good. And if you find like a new old stock or reproduction parts for something, I mean, you could really strike a fantastic deal with some stuff, but you just need to do a lot of thinking and research because you don't need to get stuck with something that you can't use, especially if you can't return it. And I would also recommend, and this is one of the biggies, make sure if you get a turntable, new or old, that you can replace the stylus. Some old turntables, and I think even some new turntables, you can't replace the stylus. So once the needle wears out, it's worn out, and that's what could really damage your records. So please make sure that you can actually swap it out. And swapping a needle on a turntable is super easy. There's a million YouTube tutorials, so you'll never probably get stuck or damage something, because as long as you take your time and watch a video or read the instructions, it's going to be an easy swap. And the next comparison here is belt-driven turntables versus direct drive turntables. Personally, I've only ever owned belt-driven turntables, and everyone that I know that has a turntable also has belt-driven turntables. Belt-driven turntables are, pretty self-explanatory. The motor is connected to a belt, and that belt runs to the platter, and that's how your turntable spins. And with a direct drive, there's a bunch of gear mechanisms that as soon as you press play, the gears get the turntable all the way up to speed. Because with a belt drive turntable, it takes it a few seconds to get to the correct speed, but with a direct drive, it automatically gets there. Another thing is that direct drive turntables have a little bit more accuracy when it comes to keeping speed, but this isn't some really noticeable difference. In fact, most people that I know that talk about direct drive turntables flat out say you cannot hear the difference unless you have superhuman ears. You're not going to be able to tell. And also too, maintenance on the two systems is vastly different. If the belt goes bad on a belt-driven turntable, you just simply take it off and put a new one on. But with a direct drive, if something breaks, if you don't know how to fix it, you're going to have to try to take it somewhere. And if it's an older direct drive turntable, you might just be out of luck. So for my money, I would definitely stick with a belt drive turntable. Now, on to what I would and would not recommend. Now, I wouldn't recommend any turntable that has this red stylus. And no, I'm not saying this because I'm some snob. I'm saying it because the mechanism used, as in the entire turntable mechanism, it's just cheap. They're just 10-cent mechanisms, and they're in all different types of cheap turntables, which prices vary. And like I said, I had one and it broke, and it even damaged one of my records. So I wouldn't recommend it, especially if you plan on listening to records for a long time. What I would personally recommend is that you get an Audio-Technica LP60 or LP70. These are both fantastic turntables, and the LP70 even has parts like the stylus that you can actually upgrade. I would highly, highly recommend you go check out the YouTube channel Recordology. These guys review the turntables that I not only mentioned, but all the turntables in that same price range, from like the 100 and 300 range, and even a little bit above that, a little bit below that. And they're just honest and sincere and overall just good people. And I would highly recommend that if you have any questions about a turntable or you want to see a review of one, look them up, because I guarantee they'll probably have it. And if you buy an old turntable, I would just make sure that it either has built-in preamp or you have some way to amplify it. And just make sure that it's not an orphan system. V Westlife has a fantastic video on orphan systems and why you shouldn't buy them. And also just make sure that you can replace the parts on it if anything goes wrong. The vintage turntable that I have is a Sony PSLX 340, and personally I love it, but it does have its downsides. It doesn't have any amplification, so you will have to get a preamp. And I did have to replace the stylus once I got it, but I plan on doing that regardless, even if it was brand new, because it was the original old Sony stylus. So this thing, for whatever reason, can pick up radio interference. And if the interference somehow gets intercepted, your turntable, your whole entire system, your speakers, everything just buzzes, immensely buzzes, and it almost feels like your head's gonna blow up. So just make sure, if you're like me and get one of these things, make sure you keep it away from any radio interference. And one last little side note, there are turntables that are analog and turntables that are automatic. All this really means is that analog turntables are turntables that you cut on and you move the needle and you place it wherever and you adjust the speed yourself and all that stuff. It's very hands-on. As where automatic turntables, you just press a button or flip a switch and the turntable does whatever you want it to do. As long as you know how to maintain it and use it, it doesn't matter which one you get. Now, record buying itself is kind of an interesting thing. You can buy records just about anywhere, whether it be a retail store or online. I mean, Walmart carries these things, and Target does too. I mean, they're everywhere now, which is a good thing because it means more people can buy records, but they're also too starting to decline in price, showing that the kind of trend to buy these records is starting to go down. In terms of new or used records, it really doesn't matter. As long as the record's in good shape and the sleeve's in good shape, I would say get either or. If you can find a new record that's used, I would get it if it's in good shape, especially if it's way cheaper. There's a place that I sometimes shop at that has used records that are brand new releases but used, and they are usually marked down around half the price of it being new. And what's really cool too is that the special releases of records in different colors is starting to become a bit more mainstream, and you can go into your local Walmarts or Targets and you can find really good albums on a special pressing of a particular color, and you can get that for a relatively cheap price. But don't get too swept up in color variants. Some people are going to try to rip you off because they know that you want the special limited edition color of something instead of just paying the normal $20 for the black vinyl pressing. Now, this also kind of ties into supporting local record shops. Where I live, there's several local record stores, but most of them are just really overpriced. You can buy a record online for $17 and then go in their store and they're asking $30 to $40. And that's not an exaggeration. That's happened to me several times. And so what I really want to say is if you want to support a local record shop, I would follow a $5 rule to where If the record costs more than $5 in the shop than it does online, then I wouldn't get it in the shop. And there's one thing I don't really see talked about that much, which is unofficial pressings. All these really are just pressings of an album that either the band or the record label didn't approve of, but yet a record pressing plant actually made it. I have several of these albums myself, mainly being like Sam Hain and Danzig records. And some people frown on unofficial pressings. I don't, because all the ones I own are albums that the band or the person who owns the rights to that album refused to re-release. So of course I'm gonna buy the unofficial pressing for like $30 instead of trying to hunt down an official that's gonna cost me like 100 and up. And this isn't like buying some bootleg CD that's made from some 10-cent CD that you can buy at the store in a pack of 30. Like, making a record takes time. It's a process, and you have to use certain equipment because you can't just burn a record like you can a CD. So it is the real thing. You can't fake it in that sense, but it's just not a true release from that band or person or whatever. And while we're on the topic of records, I also want to mention like 78s and shellac records. These records are very outdated. And I mean, yes, some of your cheaper stereo systems or turntables and stuff, you can play 78 speed records, but there's not really a point. Like, there just isn't. Unless you're just like a diehard music collector, there isn't really any point in getting them other than, I guess, decorative or audiophile or whatever it may be. I just wouldn't recommend it. I mean, I own one myself. It's of Elvis Presley's first ever like recorded piece of music, but I've never played it. It's just kind of like I guess you could just say is this like a collector's piece. So that's really all I have to say about records. Just make sure you're not overspending. Always look for the best deal. And, don't go too gung-ho on records that haven't been released in a while, because typically it will be re-released. It might be a while, but it'll eventually get that re-release. Trust me, I've been in those situations before. And in almost every case, the re-release has been 100 times better than the original or previous releases. And right here is where we're going to have to take a break. The video editing software I use just can't handle making videos more than a half hour long, which kind of sucks, but at least this makes this video series a bit more digestible. In the next part, I'm going to be covering CDs, cassettes, amplifiers and receivers, and speakers. In fact, I'm working on part 2 as I'm editing this one as well. I'm trying to get everything done in one big go. That way I don't have like big spaces in between my releases. So just stay tuned and I will catch you in the next one. I also have no clue what I'm going to do for like a profile picture or like anything. So I'm just going to use this stick figure until I can figure something out. I hope y'all enjoy it for the next, however long I use it. Oh,